Yes, I will collect that. Yeah, I just about have chapter 10 done. I got them on the on the back page, and I will get those handed back as soon as possible. Okay. So we want to put this to a type of practical use because we've only talked about it. We've never shown you how to actually utilize it because in my estimation, unless you can put yourself in these shoes of in maybe an unfortunate, what do I want to say, not occurrence, that's not the word I'm looking for. Um, well, I suppose that works, but for someone happening to them going down the road, which I'm sure nationwide, sometimes this does happen. So I don't know how that shows up on the camera, but it says, while driving on a busy highway, a truck, I suppose you could say semi-truck hauling pipes, probably we'll just say water line pipes are about 36 inches in diameter. So in other words, these are actually pretty good sized. In other words, 3 feet. And as that truck is hauling these pipes down the road, for some reason, maybe the binder breaks or the chain breaks or some sort of strap that is holding that load down, that breaks on the trailer, okay? So then that load then spills on the roadway in front of you. So then what we're asking is what physiological changes are taking place inside yourself because you're obviously going to react to that. But what we want to explore, what is actually happening inside of yourself because typically when it comes to it's really tough to train yourself for this, and I'm not saying I would be the best at it either, but the last time that a deer ran onto the roadway, straight into it. I mean, that's just one of the things I don't know if you can really train yourself for that. That's just where, I'm not saying mental maturity or life experience or just, I don't know how to explain that. And maybe it was just lucky on my part that I really didn't have any opportunity to swerve. I saw it, but you just, again, try to tell yourself in that situation, do not swerve. Do not swerve. So how do you quiet that? I really don't know if you want to call it that because only some of you might remember I used to drive a little Mitsubishi Lancer, quite a bit different than the Chevy Avalanche that sits out there. So that little Mitsubishi on the side, just all of its door panels were, I couldn't even crawl out that side. I hit them on the front corner panel, spun the deer around, and then couldn't find him because I had told, it was actually on Halloween, I want to say 3 years ago, because I remember pulling into and talking to Chase because he was combining, well, I don't know, he wasn't combining, but he was working there. So I don't know, I just pull in there and I got out and he walked over and said, everything okay? And of course, you think you have a handle on all that. You know, I thought I did, and I just probably just looked like was totally out of it, and probably was. I really don't know. I just remember answering, yeah, I just had hit this deer, and then I just look at the side of the vehicle, and like I said, both corner panels were shot, and you know, the mind is a crazy thing, and what it can actually do to you, physiologically speaking, it's I don't know how you describe that. Just hopefully none of you have to go through that. And so then, well, the first thing you do, get out the phone and let administration know. I said, God, I just hit a deer, so I'm going to be late for school. So I'm trying to think, why did I go home? Probably because I didn't know really what to do for sure. And then just came later that day and away we went. But And one of the reasons I wanted to tell Chase, I do remember this. About a quarter mile back, I just smoked a deer. He's probably somewhere in the ditch. I suppose you could say free deer if you want it. But I don't know. It might be such an aspect you might not want that type of an animal to, what do I say, not harvest. What's the right word I'm looking for? After you field dress, does that make more sense? You might not want that animal field dressed because I could be led to believe if there's internal damage to a lot of the structures inside, I don't know if that ruins the carcass. We're not, and I believe you. If you're nodding your head, yes, you're probably right, because I don't know. So, and I remember the next day, I said, did you find that deer? No, couldn't find it. But typically, in this case, we're just going under the presumption that maybe you got time to react, but in this case, you probably do need to swerve, because if one of them things comes through the windshield, it's probably going to do some major damage to yourself. So in this case, you're probably going to want to try to swerve out of the way. So again, this is just a type of hypothetical situation where we're trying to describe what's actually happening to you physiologically speaking. And this has, write your own ending to this. We'll just go under the presumption that everything's fine. And that's what we would hope if that happens to anybody in here. So with this, probably what's the first thing that's going to happen? Because remember, the nervous system, it is moving like that. So you're probably going to want to start talking about moving out of the way. Well, how do you know to move out of the way other than your brain telling you? It has to get some sort of information coming in and what's actually going to cause you to swerve. So as you're looking at that diagram, if we're talking about skeletal muscles, okay, what portion of the nervous system is that in? The somatic or autonomic? It is the somatic, okay? Because autonomic deals with what instead? Well, that's true, but organs that are beyond your physiological control, whether it's heart rate, respiratory rate, or digestion. Okay, so what's going to happen, okay, so a stimulus, you could call it that, a stimulus will travel through what system into your brain, into the central computer? So you know it's on the somatic side, but what portion of the somatic side? Are you sure? Yeah, I mean when I do that, okay? Because I think I told you I had a senior a few years ago. He said, I hate it when you do that. Well, it's not that we like, maybe it seems like punishment, but it's not, we're trying to make you second guess yourself, but we just want to make sure that if you're confident with it and you go, yeah, that's right, which it is. We'll travel through the afferent division to where? So if it's going through the afferent division, that means it's going up, okay? So it's going up into, oh, I just saw a student looking in. She was a 7th grader, so I was trying to wave her to come in. I really don't mind, okay? A stimulus travels through the afferent division so afferent, stop with that. Afferent division, this is important too, of the, you can abbreviate this, okay? Because you don't want to put the ANS there because we're not that far yet. Because you had already correctly said what's within the somatic nervous system. Skeletal muscles, and that's how you're actually going to hopefully keep control of the car. Now, if you write this down, fine. If you don't, we are recording this, so I mean, you can always go back and watch, and some of you can probably remember this. So, yes? Yes. Okay? So then, what's going to happen, your brain's going to interpret what's going on, so it's going to be a react. That's how you keep the afferent and efferent division separate, okay? So in other words, the efferent has the effect in it, okay? So you have a stimulus travel through the afferent division of the somatic nervous system. Therefore, the central computer is going to cause you to react because your brain's telling you something really bad has just happened, although you don't have time to think about that. This is, again, just a very quick reaction. So the brain will cause you to react, and an outgoing response is going through what part? So we had the incoming response going through the afferent division. Now you're going to have a response going through the efferent division, and that has the effect part in it, okay? Causing you to react. So an outgoing response travels through the efferent division. Of SNS, and that has an effect on what? This outgoing response. Skeletal muscles. An outgoing response travels through the efferent division of the SNS. The effect is on, as you correctly said, skeletal muscles. So if it's having an effect on skeletal muscles, your reaction is probably going to be what? It's just the opposite of the example we gave about the deer. The deer, we said, you need to keep going straight. But in this case, you're going to try to swerve out of the way. So this effect is on skeletal muscles. We'll just say swerve out of harm's way. Okay? I mean, that's what your brain is actually going to try to cause your body to do. Okay? But that is just one half of what it is that would probably be taking place. Even though we say this is reaction time, you are still thinking about it because I'm thinking you're about ready to say, oh my God, that might be about the last thing you'll be able to say, and your brain is telling you, swerve out of the way. Because not only are these things pretty big in size, but they're probably pretty heavy, okay? So do you understand why is it that we would say swerve out of the way for this, but we say if it's a deer, keep going straight? Why would we say that? What's that? True, but something like this is probably, I didn't give you a weight on this, but something like this is probably 1,200 pounds or more, okay? So that's going to do some major damage to any type of vehicle, okay? Unlike that deer, is maybe 200, maybe, but I didn't give you enough information with that, maybe. Does that make sense so far? You see something, a signal is being sent, that stimulus is being sent to your brain. It's going through the afferent division. The central computer will then send out an outgoing response through the SNS, or your somatic division. that has an effect on your skeletal muscles. So you swerve out of the way. That is what's happening on this side of the nervous system. Because notice you have another side, and that other side is what? The autonomic portion. Can we erase this part? Okay? Because you'll be explaining something fairly similar to this. I've used examples of skunks, deer, Halloween. Maybe we should have stuck with that. Any one of those types or something to that effect. But I just thought, well, we'll do this example now instead. Okay, so at the same time you have your somatic nervous system working. What do you think is happening on your autonomic side? What might be happening? You still have a stimulus, okay? So on the autonomic side or autonomic nervous system, okay, how many divisions are on that autonomic side? Is it like an afferent and efferent division, or is there more to it than that? Oh, okay. So again, you still have that same stimulus, okay? That's why we, I just didn't write that yet. On the autonomic side, the same stimulus okay? That same stimulus is going towards the central computer, okay? But are you going to be able to react where you stop your vehicle? Are you going to be shaken up, do you think? You might think, oh, yeah, no problem. I won't have any issues with this at all. Well, heck, I just hit just a small deer, and I wasn't all there. And maybe should have taken maybe an hour or two off. I don't know, because you think you have a handle on these emotions, but sometimes it's a little more difficult. But a little more maturity, for instance, I think you will just naturally get a better handle on those types of issues. Okay. So the stimulus is being sent to the brain. What's maybe happening to you physiologically besides swerving out of the way, slamming on the brakes, screaming, all of those? So again, what's one of them red arrows sending out, going down? Something about another SNS or sympathetic nervous system. What about the sympathetic nervous system? What does that have an effect on? So what do you suppose is happening to your cardiac muscles at that moment where a response is being sent down that your brain is telling you are in danger right now? Your heart rate is definitely going to go up. So, but what's causing that? You know the answer, you just don't know you know it. And it's from a little gland that sits above the kidney. It starts with the letter A, then D, then R, E, adrenaline. That's right. Okay? So on the autonomic nervous system side, the same stimulus is sent to the brain, okay, or central computer. I need to pause this for just a moment. So what does that blue arrow say that's going up to that? I skipped a little minute portion of that. Okay, so visceral receptors are like receptors in your heart, in your adrenal glands, like we just said. I inadvertently skipped over this step, not meaning to. So visceral receptors are signaling the release of that adrenaline. Gesundheit. Now your outgoing response going down, okay? Okay? On the, now, you can use these abbreviations as long as you know what it stands for, okay? And what I mean by that, okay, let's say we had potassium carbonate. You don't always need to write that out. As long as you know what potassium carbonate is, why not just do that? Which is fine, because you know that if I start out with potassium carbonate, I know that's what the formula is, K2CrO3. So in this case, what I mean is on the sympathetic nervous system, because once you see SNS, you might be thinking what instead? Somatic nervous system, okay? All right, so on the somatic nervous system side, the response has an effect and it's what you said earlier. It was one of you who's, yeah, well, the adrenaline that's been released, what's that going to have an effect on? Yep, okay. So it has an effect on cardiac muscle. Okay, has an effect on cardiac muscle. What's going to happen with that cardiac muscle? Does adrenaline cause it to speed up or slow down? It's going to speed up, okay? So we'll just say heart rate increases. Okay? Now, that heart rate is going to keep going. It's going to keep an elevated rate until something breaks that. And it's right next to the sympathetic nervous system. When we say PNS, we don't mean peripheral nervous system, but rather what according to your table? Parasympathetic nervous system, okay? So we'll just say over time, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we don't know. So over time, the parasympathetic nervous system will cause your heart rate to slow down back to a normal rate. Okay. So this is why, rather than trying to remember all this content, I think if you have this table in front of you, you can actually make sense of what's actually going on. And you can use that on your scenario like this that will be on part 2. Okay? Part 1 on Thursday is just your vocabulary evaluations and just some general questions. And then part 2 is your cranial nerves in order and a couple essays. This is one of them. Okay? It's not going to be this exact same question. It'll be something fairly similar. Okay? Now, someone might be looking at that and saying, you really should be more specific with sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. I mean, it's on the table, okay? And it is a lot to remember. And if you want, there's nothing wrong with writing sympathetic nervous system, peripheral nervous system, central nervous system, and autonomic nervous system, and somatic. I mean, those are all on there, and this is just a tool to help you decipher that content. Okay. And if there was a question, you might not have any idea of what to even ask with that. But this is where we will stop for today, unless you have something to add or share or need some clarification on. Otherwise, the rest of the time is yours. I mean, I'm looking at the recording on here, and we're well over 20 minutes already. Okay, that's all I have. We'll catch up to you next time.